Thank you for joining us today for this segment of Americans Helping Americans. Today we're here to have a roundtable discussion on California water, a reliable solution. With me today is Tim Newharth. Tim represents a fifth-generation California Delta farming family. Family's been here since 1848, right, Tim?
Correct. Thank you.
And Tim's also a certified organic farmer. Also with us today is Dr. Robert Pyke. Dr. Pyke received his undergraduate degree from Sydney, Australia, thus the wonderful Australian accent, and his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and I'm going to try to get this right, in civil and geotechnical engineering with a minor in environmental planning. I was surprised and impressed, Dr. Pyke, to learn that you were also one of the principal authors of the Economic Sustainability Plan that was adopted by the Delta Protection Commission, and you've been a consultant as a consulting engineer on big projects, both earthquake, geotechnical, and water resource engineering projects all over. So welcome to both of you. Tim, please ask the doctor some questions about where we go and some of his, frankly, really good ideas.
Sure, not a problem. So Dr. Pyke, we're here today to talk about the Western Delta intakes concept that you've authored, and we'll do that in two parts. Today we'll talk about BDCP and the current situation as it stands, and then later on we'll talk about WDIC, Western Delta intakes concept in particular. But before we get started with all of that, maybe you could explain the current water situation and how we have come to where we are today in relationship to the Twin Tunnels and the BDCP, or the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. That came forward in 2009 via legislation by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger as the co-equal goals of water reliability for California and restoration of the Delta ecosystem.
Sure. These are actually two similar but distinct things. The 2009 Delta Reform Act put into law for the first time the fact that ecosystem restoration was supposed to be considered on an equal footing with water conveyance. Until 2009, in terms of state legislation, it had all been about delivering more and more water, ignoring the fact that precipitation in California is very variable. And the way the water system is set up in California is fine for wet years, but it's inadequate for dry years or droughts like we've just been going through. And what happens in a drought is that the exporters suck all of the water that they can, that they're permitted to take out of the delta, and the delta ecosystem has been progressively degraded. So in 2009, the state legislature, following up on the Delta Vision activity, passed legislation that said ecosystem restoration and water supply reliability are co-equal goals. And that is the state's policy, and that, by and large, is a good policy. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan, or the BDCP, purports to have similar goals, but it started earlier, around 2007. And in spite of its name, in spite of being called a conservation plan, it is basically about water supply reliability for the exporters. It's a conveyance plan. The conservation plan comes in because in order to be able to reliably export water under the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, they are seeking state and federal permits, which are called incidental take permits under the Endangered Species Act, that allow incidental take of certain listed fish species.
Now, Dr. Pyke, just interrupt you for a second. What do you mean by the word take?
Take actually means to take or to kill fish.
To kill, okay.
Even a fish that is on the endangered species list. Under certain circumstances, if you've done persuasive studies that your operations are only going to take a few fish and not harm the population as a whole, then you can get a 50-year permit. And that's what the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is all about. But the Bay Delta Conservation Plan only seeks to restore the delta ecosystem to the extent that is necessary to get these permits, because their principal goal is water exports. They give face value to satisfying the co-equal goals of the 2009 legislation, but as I've already said, their emphasis is on water conveyance, not on ecosystem restoration.
Okay. Over the past several years, it's been reported that $250 million have been spent on exploring the BDC plan and hopefully alleviating California's water crisis. We've heard about the North fighting Central and Southern California, Governor Schwarzenegger and Jerry Brown, California Department of Water Resources, Metropolitan Water District, Westlands Water District, Kern County Water Bank, all of these things being sometimes at odds, but sometimes also trying to move this plan forward. This $250 million that's been sent so far, what's your opinion of that, and where has that taken us?
Well, the people that have put up the $250 million, the water agencies that take water through the State Water Project and the federal Central Valley Project, have basically put $250 million down the drain, because even though the successive administrations, first the Schwarzenegger administration and then the Brown administration, have been giving support to this Bay Delta Conservation Plan, to date they've produced no documents that are worthy of granting the incidental take permits, approving an environmental impact program, or going to construction. The only people that have benefited from the expenditure of the $250 million are the consultants. But in spite of having produced 40,000 pages or something of reports, these reports are inconsistent and incomplete. So one of the problems of the proponents of the plan is simply that it's been mismanaged. Those proponents are principally the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the water wholesaler for much of Southern California, and the Westlands Water District that supplies farmers down the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. The other big player that Tim mentioned is the Kern County Water Agency, Paramount Farming Company, who are a principal farmer down the south end of the valley. They are paying, footing the bills so far, but their willingness to go all the way is unclear at this time. They've always questioned whether in fact the ultimate bill for construction, which people are talking about as being $16 billion for the engineering facilities and a total of $25 billion, it's not clear that Kern County Water Agency and others are willing to put up the necessary money. So the plan is at present effectively in disarray. Nominally it goes forward, but the documentation is inconsistent and incomplete, and the willingness of even its promoters to pay for it is uncertain.
The current plan of BDCP is called Alternative 4, which is 2 twin tunnels 40 feet in diameter, 9,000 to 15,000 cubic feet a second of intake, an EIR and ERS, as you mentioned, of 40,000 pages, to be built and taking water out for the purposes of taking water out of the primary zone of the Delta. Can you discuss the mechanics of that plan a bit more, and the flaws that, or the major flaws that you see in that scenario?
Sure. The original intent was to have 5 intakes on the Sacramento River in the North Delta, each of these 5 intakes would have a capacity of 3,000 cubic feet per second.
Dr. Pyke, can I stop you just for a second? What does that look like, 3,000 cubic feet per second?
Commonly, people say that a cubic foot per second is like a basketball flying by your face. In truth, a cubic foot is about 3 basketballs, so it's 3,000 cubic feet per second is like 9,000 basketballs flying by your face in 1 second. That's a lot of water. Another way to put it is that 3,000 cubic feet per second will fill up a football field to a depth of 1 foot in 16 seconds, or 4 feet in a minute, or in 10 minutes would fill up a football field to a depth of 40 feet.
That's about 4 stories, isn't it?
Yeah. Conversely, that water is coming out of a river. Now, more water comes into that hole in the river, but you can picture instantaneously creating a hole in the Sacramento River the size of a football field that in 10 minutes would go down 40 feet, which is greater than the depth of the river. So that is a lot of water to be taking out. Originally at 5 inlets, that was reduced by the Brown administration down to 3 inlets, 9,000 cubic feet per second from the North Delta. That would operate in companionship with pumping from the South Delta for a total delivery of almost 15,000 cubic feet per second when availability of water and permits allow it. That would be done by means of transporting the water from the North Delta in twin tunnels, 35 feet long. There's a graphic that shows this. It's not particularly clear,
35
but
miles long.
35 miles
Yes,
long.
okay.
What did I say?
Feet. All these numbers, yes.
I have feet on my head from the depth of water, but 35 miles long, thank you. Winding its way under the delta. The 3 intakes in the vicinity of Clarksburg and Hood up in the North Delta, and those 35-mile twin tunnels would deliver the water to the Clifton Court forebay in the South Delta. Those tunnels are the principal engineering component of the BDCP. They account for not all, but much of the $16 billion cost.
The location of the intake being in the North Delta versus elsewhere, what's your opinion as it relates to the concern of the Delta ecosystem in that regard?
Well, it's generally agreed that the South Delta is not the perfect location for the pumps, because with the pumps in the South Delta, you drag water across the delta in an unnatural flow pattern. That does have the benefit of keeping the water in the Central and South Delta fresh because of lack of flow in the San Joaquin River. But on the whole, it's disastrous for the ecosystem, and as the exports have ramped up, there's no question that the ecosystem and various fish populations have gone into decline. So going to the North Delta does one principal thing, which is provides improved water quality, which is what Metropolitan Water District want. It was supposed to provide an environmental benefit in that these cross flows, particularly in the Old and Middle River, drag Delta smelt, a listed species, down to the Delta, the South Delta pumps. But by going to the North Delta, you do get somewhat better water quality, but that's critical for the passage of salmon. And it turns out that the restrictions that the federal fish agencies quite properly are imposing on the operation of the North Delta pumps means that, in order to protect the salmon, means that overall the North Delta pumps are probably only used for half of the supply. The South Delta pumps are still used for half of the supply. Water quality is not improved that much. And the pattern of flow through the delta is made worse rather than better because some of the flow simply disappears. It just disappears in the North Delta and is never seen in a natural state of flow again.
So it disappears by virtue of the fact that it's going underground in these two 40-foot tunnels around the delta.
Yeah, I think I skipped the mention of the diameter. They're presently planned to be 40 feet diameter.
Each 40 feet?
Two 40 feet diameter tunnels. That's pretty big diameter tunnels. That's in order to carry a total of 9,000 cubic feet per second under gravity flow. You still need, that's to minimize some of the engineering issues, but you still have to pump the water out of the river, so there are still fairly significant energy costs.
As a levee engineer and with all of your past experience, what's your opinion of this current recommendation of the BDCP plan? A related question is who pays and who wins and who loses in this BDCP plan?
Well, who pays is fairly straightforward. The water exporters pay for the engineering component, the $16 billion. That's always been the case. It's unclear who pays for the ecosystem restoration component. Since the delta ecosystem has been degraded by water exports, you might think that the water exporters should pay for that also, but they are trying to put that cost onto the general public, using the argument that the ecosystem improvement would benefit everyone. That's true, but the degradation has been caused by special interests who are now refusing to pay for remedying the damage that they've done. So that's an ongoing fight. Who wins? Nobody wins in the current situation. With the original 15,000 cubic feet per second plan, Metropolitan Water District would win in terms of getting better water quality. Now, with the cutback, it's not clear that anyone wins. Metropolitan doesn't get much better water quality. Westlands hope to fill San Luis Reservoir on a more reliable basis. That's uncertain. So it seems to me that the water exporters have already flushed $250 million down the drain. They can't produce documentation that shows that even they are going to get any substantial benefit out of the plan. But so far, neither the